My name is Charlotte Whitmore, and if you had attended my grandmother's wake 3 years ago, you would have witnessed the night my father attempted to erase me from our family, in front of 30 relatives, 3 business associates, and half of Surrey's most judgmental elite. But what he didn't know was that my grandmother had already rewritten my fate. I grew up in a 6-bedroom Georgian house in Surrey, the kind with white pillars, manicured hedges, and windows that always seemed to glare down at you like disapproving eyes. My father, Edward Whitmore, was a barrister with a reputation for dismantling people in court. At home he did the same, just without witnesses. Or so he thought. My older brother, Henry, was the heir, the golden child, the future of Whitmore and Hale Chambers. From the age of 12, father introduced him at dinners as my successor. And me? This is Charlotte, he'd say flatly. She's creative. Creative. The word was never a compliment in our house. It meant impractical, emotional, weak. I loved literature. I wrote essays that won competitions. I wanted to work in publishing. Father wanted me married to someone wealthy by 25. You don't build legacies with poetry, he once told me at dinner. No, I replied quietly, but you build humanity. The silence that followed could have frozen the Thames. From that night forward, I became the family embarrassment. Henry drove a new Audi at 19. I took the train. Henry received applause at every gathering. I received raised eyebrows. At family events, Aunt Margaret would say, "Still chasing your little writing hobby, Charlotte?" My cousin James once laughed outright. "She'll come running back when she realizes she can't pay rent with metaphors." And my father, he never defended me. He agreed. Then there was Grandma Evelyn. She was the only one who saw me, truly saw me. "Never apologize for being different," she would whisper when father criticized me. "Your strength is simply quieter than theirs." When she fell ill, I was the one who stayed with her. Henry was too busy. Father had court obligations. I held her hand through chemotherapy. I read to her when she couldn't sleep. I organized her medication when the nurses grew careless. She once squeezed my hand and said, "Charlotte, promise me you won't let them convince you that you are small." Promised. I didn't know then that she had already prepared something far greater than advice. The night of her wake, our house overflowed with relatives dressed in black silk and concealed curiosity. 30 of them at least. The Whitmores were nothing if not theatrical in grief. Champagne was served. Conversations hummed. And then my father stood near the fireplace and tapped his glass. The room fell silent. "As many of you know," he began smoothly, "Mother's estate has been organized responsibly." Organized responsibly. That was Father's way of saying controlled. Henry will, of course, inherit the majority of the assets and assume responsibility for the Whitmore countryside property. Polite nods. Murmurs of approval. "And Charlotte," he continued, glancing at me with something between irritation and amusement, "will receive a modest allowance." Allowance. I was 27. 30 heads turned toward me. My face burned. Father wasn't finished. Given her unconventional career path, it seems appropriate. A ripple of laughter traveled through the room. Unconventional. That's what he called the fact that I refused to work at his chambers. Aunt Margaret smirked. "At least she won't have to worry about budgeting now." Cousin James added loudly, "Perhaps this will motivate you to settle down, Charlotte." Settle down. Translation. Marry well and stop embarrassing us. I stood there humiliated, exposed. And then my father delivered the final blow. "Frankly," he said, swirling his drink, "Mother always had a soft spot for Charlotte. But sentiment does not equate to capability." Capability? He questioned my competence in front of everyone. Something inside me cracked that night. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly. Like ice under pressure. 3 weeks later, the official reading of the will was scheduled at Father's chambers in London. Of course it was. His courtroom. His stage. The conference room was lined with dark oak shelves and intimidating law books. 30 relatives squeezed inside, eager for confirmation of what they believed was already settled. Henry looked smug. Father looked victorious. I sat near the end of the table, hands folded, prepared for final humiliation. Then Mr. Collins walked in, the family solicitor. He looked unusually tense. Father gestured. Let's proceed. Mr. Collins cleared his throat. Before we address the will, there is a separate legal instrument that must be acknowledged. Father frowned. Separate? Yes. An irrevocable trust established in 2018. The year Grandma's diagnosis became serious. My pulse quickened. The trust, Mr. Collins continued carefully, names a sole beneficiary. Henry leaned forward. Father's jaw tightened. And that beneficiary, he said, adjusting his glasses, is Miss Charlotte Whitmore. Silence. Total, suffocating silence. My ears rang. Father blinked once. Then twice. I beg your pardon, he said coldly. Mr. Collins placed the documents on the table. Mrs. Evelyn Whitmore transferred the Surrey countryside estate, her investment portfolio, and the majority of her financial holdings into an irrevocable trust. It cannot be amended or contested. Henry went pale. Aunt Margaret gasped. Cousin James whispered, That's impossible. But it wasn't. Father's voice sharpened. She would never have done this without consulting me. She did consult me, Mr. Collins replied calmly, and she was very clear in her intentions. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the room could hear it. Father turned slowly toward me. For the first time in my life he looked uncertain. Why? He demanded. Mr. Collins reached into the folder again. There is also a letter, he said, to be read privately by Charlotte. My name didn't sound small anymore. It sounded powerful. I stood up slowly. No trembling. No tears. Just steady steps across the oak floor. Every pair of eyes followed me, but this time not with mockery. With shock. Father moved aside without realizing he had done so. That alone felt like victory. I took the envelope. Cream paper. Grandma's handwriting. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the embarrassment in the room. I was the heir. But what none of them understood was this. Grandma hadn't simply given me money. She had given me control. And I had spent 27 years learning exactly how my father operated. I knew his weaknesses, his pride, his secrets. And as I stood there holding that envelope, I realized something terrifyingly beautiful. The girl they had mocked now owned the house they lived in. And this was only the beginning. I didn't open Grandma's letter in that conference room. I could have. I could have stood there, ripped it open dramatically, and let whatever she'd written echo against the polished oak walls of Father's precious chambers. But revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It's patient. So I slipped the envelope into my handbag and walked out without a word. Behind me the room erupted. Henry's voice first. This is absurd. There must be some technicality. Aunt Margaret hissed. Evelyn was manipulated. And my father didn't shout. He did something far more dangerous. He went quiet. If you've never seen a powerful man realize he's lost control, let me describe it for you. It's subtle. A tightening of the jaw. A stillness behind the eyes. A recalculation. He wasn't angry yet. He was planning. And so was I. I waited until I was alone in my flat in Clapham before opening Grandma's letter. The flat Father once called a temporary phase. The flat I paid for myself with my publishing job, the same job he mocked. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the cream paper. Her handwriting was delicate but firm. My dearest Charlotte, if you are reading this, it means your father has attempted to dictate my wishes on my behalf. He has always believed authority belongs to the loudest voice in the room. But strength, my darling girl, often whispers. Tears blurred my vision. She knew. She had anticipated him. You have been underestimated your entire life. I watched it happen. I regret not intervening more strongly when you were young. This trust is not a reward. It is protection. Your father's chambers are financially strained. Henry's investments have been reckless. Within 5 years they will need liquidity. They will come to you. When they do, remember, you owe them nothing. My breath caught. Strained? Reckless? Grandma continued. I built my wealth independently before I married. Your father forgets that. I do not. The Surrey estate is yours outright. The investment portfolio is diversified and secure. I have left detailed instructions with Mr. Collins. Do not let them intimidate you. And above all, do not shrink. The letter ended with 3 words underlined twice. You are capable. I sat there for a long time. For years I had internalized their narrative, that I was the weaker sibling, the impractical daughter, the emotional liability. But Grandma had been watching quietly, planning quietly, just like I was about to. The first move came from Father. 2 days later. He requested dinner. Not invited. Requested. At a private club in Mayfair where women weren't even allowed membership until 2008. I arrived deliberately 5 minutes late. He was already seated, immaculate as ever in a tailored navy suit. "Charlotte," he said coolly. "Father." No hug. No warmth. Straight to business. "I assume you've reviewed the documents." "Yes. And you understand," he continued, "that managing such assets requires experience. I manage my own finances just fine." He ignored that. "The Surrey estate carries maintenance costs, taxes, staffing. I've already spoken to the estate manager." That made him pause. A flicker of irritation. "I see." Then he leaned forward. "Henry's property development venture requires short-term capital. A loan from the trust would be sensible." There it was. Grandma had predicted this perfectly. "How much?" I asked calmly. "2 million. I almost laughed. £2 million. For the brother who once told me I'd never survive without family support. "For what return?" I asked. His eyes hardened. "Family doesn't require return." Family. The word felt almost insulting. "Family," I said softly, "doesn't publicly humiliate their daughter either." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You're being emotional." "No," I replied steadily. "I'm being strategic." Silence stretched between us. I sipped my water. He realized slowly that the power dynamic had shifted. "I am advising you," he said carefully, "as someone with significantly more legal and financial expertise." "And I'm declining," I said simply. His composure cracked just slightly. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "I'm making a decision." And I stood up. For the second time in a month I left him sitting there. That should have been enough. But my father was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. Within weeks, rumors began circulating. Subtle at first. "She's overwhelmed. She's seeking outside influence. She's unstable." Unstable. The classic word used against women who refuse compliance. Then came the emails. Henry accusing me of destroying family unity. Aunt Margaret suggesting I was being vindictive. Cousin James hinting that Grandma must have been confused when signing documents. They underestimated two things. I had copies of every legal document. I had access to information. Remember Grandma's warning? Henry's investments. Father's strained chambers. I asked Mr. Collins for a meeting. Privately. "Off the record," I said. He hesitated, then agreed. That's when I learned the full picture. Father had leveraged part of his firm's assets to back Henry's development project. Luxury flats in Kensington. The market had slowed. Construction delays. Overextended credit. If the project failed, Whitmore and Hale could collapse. And if that collapsed, Father's legacy would crumble with it. I went home that night and stared at Grandma's letter again. They had spent years convincing me I was powerless. But power isn't noise. It's knowledge. So I made my second move. Not revenge. Not yet. Leverage. I arranged a formal board-style meeting at the Surrey estate. My estate. Father. Henry. Their financial advisor. I wore navy. Structured. Controlled. They arrived expecting negotiation. They left with conditions. "I am willing," I began calmly, "to consider a secured loan." Father tried not to look relieved. "Under strict terms." Henry scoffed. "You think you're a bank now?" "No," I said evenly. "I think I'm the majority asset holder." That silenced him. I laid out my conditions. A full transparency of Whitmore and Hale financials. A collateral against Henry's personal shares. A public acknowledgement that the trust was intentional and valid. And one final clause. If repayments failed, I would assume controlling interest in the chamber's assets. Father stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "You're threatening us." "No," I corrected softly. "I'm protecting myself." He stood abruptly. "This is absurd." "No," I said again. This is business. The same word he had used my entire childhood to dismiss emotions. Now I was using it to dismantle his authority. Henry looked furious. Father looked cornered. They asked for 48 hours. I gave them 24. That night, alone in the Surrey house, I walked through Grandma's old library. I ran my fingers across the spines of her books. And for the first time in my life I felt tall. Not because of money, because of clarity. They had insulted me, mocked me, dismissed me, but they had also trained me. I had learned how my father negotiated, how he intimidated, how he cornered opponents. He forgot one thing. I was his daughter, and I had been watching. The next morning Father called. His voice was controlled but strained. We accept your terms. Of course they did. They had no alternative. But here's what he didn't realize. I had no intention of letting them fail immediately. No. True reckoning requires patience. And I had waited 27 years. This was only Act 2. Because soon the press would get wind of the financial instability. Soon Henry's reckless spending would surface. Soon, Father would have to publicly acknowledge that the daughter he tried to humiliate had saved his firm. And when that moment came, I would decide whether the Whitmore name survived. And that was the first time I saw fear in my father's eyes. Not anger, not authority, fear. But the real revenge was still coming. Power is a curious thing. When you don't have it, you crave it. When you gain it, people fear it. And when you control it quietly, people never see you coming. 24 hours after Father accepted my terms, the paperwork was signed. Whitmore and Hale Chambers, the firm I had been told I was never worthy of entering, was now legally tied to me. Not as a daughter. Not as an embarrassment. As leverage. Henry barely looked at me during the signing. His pride was wounded, and wounded pride is more dangerous than open hostility. Father, however, had already shifted tactics. He stopped insulting me. He started studying me. That unsettled me more than the insults ever had. 3 months passed. Henry's Kensington development continued bleeding money. Construction delays turned into legal disputes. Buyers began withdrawing deposits. And then the inevitable happened. A financial blog published an article questioning Whitmore and Hale's exposure to high-risk property investments. It wasn't a major publication, but in London's legal circles, whispers spread faster than headlines. I hadn't leaked anything. I didn't need to. Recklessness exposes itself. Father called me into his office that afternoon. Not as a superior. As a man standing on unstable ground. "You've heard," he said. "Yes. We need additional liquidity." There it was again. Need. Not authority. Not command. Need. "How much?" I asked. "Another 1.5. I shook my head slowly. The agreement was clear. No additional unsecured capital. His eyes darkened. "This affects your assets too." "I'm aware." He leaned forward. "Do you want to see this family drag through the mud?" Family. The word again. Used like a weapon. For a moment, just a moment, I felt that old familiar pull. The instinct to shrink. To accommodate. To smooth over conflict. But then I remembered 30 relatives laughing while my father called me incapable. "I warned you about overextension," I said calmly. "You chose to proceed." His voice sharpened. "You think this is revenge?" "No," I replied. "This is consequence." Silence. He studied me carefully. "You've changed." "No," I said quietly. "I've stopped apologizing." The press pressure intensified. Henry's development partner filed a lawsuit. Suppliers demanded payment. One investor publicly withdrew, citing mismanagement. The Whitmore name, once untouchable, began to crack. And then came the invitation. A charity gala at the Royal Lancaster Hotel. The entire extended family would be there. So would half of Father's professional circle. Henry insisted we attend. "Optics matter," he said bitterly. "Optics. Yes, they do." The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and champagne flutes. I arrived alone. Not in black. In red. Structured silk. Sharp lines. No apology. Conversations quieted when I entered. Not because I was scandalous. Because I was composed. Aunt Margaret approached first. "Well," she said tightly, This has all become rather dramatic. Yes, I replied lightly. Recklessness often is. Her smile thinned. Cousin James avoided eye contact entirely. And then father joined me. Walk with me, he murmured. We moved toward a quieter corner. You've made your point, he said quietly. I didn't set out to make one. You've embarrassed us. I turned to him fully. Embarrassment, I said calmly, is being publicly diminished by your own father. His expression hardened. This is business. Yes, I agreed. It is. That's when the host stepped onto the stage to make announcements. One of them concerned a new donor. Someone stepping in to rescue a collapsing legal aid initiative. Whitmore and Hale had originally pledged funding, but after the scandal they had withdrawn. The room buzzed softly. Then the host smiled. We are delighted to announce that Miss Charlotte Whitmore has personally agreed to fund the program for the next 5 years. The silence was absolute. Every head turned, including father's. I met his gaze steadily. Not triumphant. Not cruel. Certain. Applause erupted. Polite at first. Then genuine. Because unlike Henry's development scheme, this was something solid. Tangible. Ethical. I hadn't just saved their firm quietly months earlier. I had now publicly demonstrated leadership. Without them, father's face revealed something I had never seen before. Not anger. Not fear. Recognition. The final collapse came 2 weeks later. Henry's development officially defaulted. Under the terms of our agreement, collateral transferred. I now held controlling interest in key Whitmore and Hale assets. Father requested a private meeting at the Surrey estate. Not his chambers. My estate. He arrived alone. No Henry. No advisors. Just Edward Whitmore, the man who once reduced me to a cautionary tale. We sat in Grandma's old library. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly, "You planned this." "No," I said honestly. "You did." He looked at me sharply. "You underestimated me," I continued. "For years. That wasn't my strategy. It was your mistake." Silence stretched between us. "You could dismantle everything," he said finally. "Yes. And will you?" That was the question, wasn't it? For years I imagined humiliating him the way he humiliated me. Making him stand in a room full of relatives while I announced his failure. Letting him feel small. Powerless. Erased. I had the legal authority. The financial leverage. The public support. I could destroy the Whitmore name entirely. But here's what I realized in that moment. Revenge that mirrors cruelty only continues it. And I was no longer the girl begging for validation. "I will restructure the firm," I said calmly. "New risk policies. Transparent accounting. Independent oversight." He listened without interruption. "You will remain," I added, "in an advisory capacity." His pride flinched at the phrasing. "Advisory?" "Yes. And Henry?" "He answers to the board." Which now meant me. The air felt different in that room. Not victorious. Balanced. "You're not punishing us," he said slowly. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting you." For the first time in my life my father looked older. Not physically. Internally. "I was hard on you," he said, the words clearly difficult. "Yes. I believed it would make you stronger." "It made me observant," I answered. That almost made him smile. Almost. As he stood to leave he paused. "Your grandmother would have approved of how you handled this." I felt something loosen inside my chest. "She taught me," I said. He nodded once. No apology, but acknowledgement. And sometimes, that is enough. 6 months later, Whitmore and Hale stabilized. The scandal faded. Henry, humbled and heavily supervised, stopped chasing reckless ventures. And me? I kept my flat in Clapham. I continued working in publishing. Because the greatest revenge of all is refusing to become what they expected. At the next family gathering, there were no jokes about my creative hobby. No patronizing smiles. No public corrections. When I entered the room, people stood straighter. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Father introduced me differently. "This is my daughter, Charlotte," he said simply. No qualifier. No insult. Just my name. And that was the moment I truly won. Not when the lawyer read the trust. Not when the assets transferred. Not when the applause filled the ballroom. But when I realized I no longer needed their approval to feel powerful. Grandma once told me strength whispers. She was right, because the loudest thing in that room now was silence. And for the first time in my life, it belonged to me.